Hello, welcome to the latest edition of the Sight Screen Cricket Journal podcast. I'm your host, Tawhid Qureshi, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to be inviting someone who's a commentator, a broadcaster. He writes about the game. In fact, if you watch any cricket coverage in the UK, he's basically all over it on county streams, women's cricket, county cricket, domestic cricket at all levels. He's absolutely all over it. He's also one half of the brilliant Final Word podcast. He is Mr. Adam Collins. Welcome, Adam.
It's lovely to be invited on to talk about Bangladesh, an area that's been, I don't know, a bit of a passion project of mine in recent years, I suppose. So I'm really grateful to get the chance to talk to your audience.
Well, it's absolutely great to have you on. I guess just maybe rewinding a little bit, the first time I kind of fully appreciated, I think, your love for Bangladesh cricket was going back to the 2019 World Cup. I remember I was driving back from Taunton after Bangladesh had just beaten the West Indies on with a great run chase down there in the West Country. And I remember driving back to London. I wasn't actually driving, my cousin was, but I was just looking around for sort of reaction to the game, looking for podcasts. Firstly, I was absolutely amazed that you and Jeff had managed to sort of upload the podcast within about, I don't know, half an hour, even less of that game ending. And then the reaction was very interesting as well, because I remember listening to TMS on the way back, and they do a fantastic job, absolutely. But the narrative was very much around West Indies, how they'd lost, they'd underperformed, all this sort of stuff. And there was very little, I thought, that was said about how well Bangladesh plays. And that was certainly something that yourself and Jeff put forward on that occasion.
Yeah, look, it was an absolute joy to make the World Cup daily on the Final Word. And on days like that, especially when Bangladesh were chasing about 330, it was their highest chase in one-day history, certainly their most impressive World Cup performance, Shakib making a century, and just generally speaking, keeping themselves in contention to reach the knockout stage of that tournament. They didn't quite get there, but they played some mighty cricket throughout. And look, my personal affection for Bangladesh cricket goes back a little ways, but I mean, the first time I wrote about Bangladesh was when I first started writing about cricket full stop in 2013, and advocating that they be given more opportunities against Australia, and building the case that there'd not been enough of it since they became a full member nation.
Yeah,
and back into one thing led to another, and it started developing. And a day like 2019, and having sort of absorbed a lot of the history, and we'll talk about that in a moment, having visited Bangladesh as well, a day like that when they were able to beat the West Indies in such emphatic style gave Jeff and I the chance to give it big, and for one of a couple of times on the Final Word, we've had the chance to sing the Richmond theme song, the Richmond Tigers theme song, which we've adopted as the Bangladesh theme song as well.
It was certainly a happy day for all Tigers fans out there. It was a special occasion for that particular day in Taunton. So let's rewind. I guess let's just say maybe some people out there might think it's a bit odd that we're talking up Bangladesh cricket the day after they've been dumped out of the World Cup and haven't really performed particularly well over the last couple of weeks, defeats to Scotland, and not winning any of their Super 12 games either. But I think just to counter that, my personal opinion, and I hope you share it as well, is that I see, firstly, I don't think Bangladesh cricket is talked about often enough. Unfortunately, it's only when, they play a major bilateral series against the likes of Australia or England or India that people really take note, or indeed when they're taking part in big sort of ICC tournaments. So, that's kind of one thing that I always like to try to counter as much as possible. And then the other thing, my feeling is as badly as as they do sometimes play, and I guess, a lot of the time they do actually underperform if you look at, what they're actually capable of. My feeling is that, there are glimpses of brilliance on any given day against certain opposition when, everything clicks into place. You do see some absolute genius cricket. It's been a bit unfortunate we haven't sort of seen it in the last couple of weeks or so, but there we go. So Yeah, let's rewind then back to 2015. I think when I guess your Tiger Love affair kind of started. Do you want to talk us through that tour?
Yeah, well, look, the 2017 tour is when I had the great fortune of going to Bangladesh. But you're right, it does stretch back to 2015 and before that as well. I touched on a piece I read about Bangladesh and Zimbabwe, two full member nations that weren't getting the type of access to Australia specifically that I thought they deserved. And then the 2015 World Cup, where they knocked out England, of course, Rubel Hussein's extraordinary spell, and the century by Mahmudullah and the innings by was it Mushi made 80 odd in that game as well. Mushfiqur was, I think, unbeaten at the end. But anyway, the point is a capable performance with the bat, and then Mahmudullah making a century against New Zealand in a losing effort, albeit, but it was sort of it was a price signal, I suppose, to the competition that on their day they could beat anybody. And yes, they don't beat India in the quarterfinal, but they account for themselves pretty well in that game too. And it felt to me like they'd taken a step, the next step, if you like, in their journey, which hadn't always been linear. They had moments of greatness, which had been interspersed with moments of, well, periods of sustained underperformance, given the investment they get via their ICC grants as a full member nation. So it was relatively inconsistent almost to that point, remembering that you go back to 2005, and I was in the UK when Bangladesh overcame Australia in Cardiff. I wasn't in Cardiff itself, but I was in the UK and got to experience that as an Australian in the UK, and it being a complete shock to the system with that magnificent team being rolled in such a way. But, you know, that was a signpost, and it wasn't necessarily followed up upon with brilliance thereafter. So, yeah, it was like a bit of not a lost decade, but between 05 and 15, there were a number of false starts, and it felt like 15 was the start of something. You press fast forward about 18 months on from then to the 2016 series, bilateral series against England, where they bowled them out in a session at Chittagong, wasn't it, and beat them there.
It's and then Dhaka, winning
a Dhaka, sorry, my apologies. And then on from that 12 further months when I went over to Bangladesh in 17. And I was determined to go on that tour. I was most enthusiastic about staying in the community as well. And we might go into this in a bit more depth, but there was a sense that any tourist to Bangladesh with the Australian team, so journalists and staff and all the rest of it, would stay in the bubble. Now, the bubble has a very different meaning these days, but then it was effectively the security canopy that was thrown over the top of the team hotel and would extend to the route they would take to the ground. And when they were at the ground, and I didn't much fancy that, I wanted to sort of do my own thing. And Mohammed Assam from ESPN Cricinfo, who's become a friend of mine, in 2015, I was scheduled to go to Bangladesh when Australia's tour was cancelled at the very last minute. And Issam was going to be looking after me over there, but he absolutely did in 2017 and set me up in the community, not far from where he lives there in Dhaka, in downtown Dhaka. So I had the great experience of being there for that Bangladesh victory by about 40 odd runs, a thrilling test match. I mean, the Prime Minister was there practically in tears, and that took it to a whole new level for me. It was one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life, being in the National Stadium on that day when Bangladesh held on. Despite some lusty hitting from Pat Cummins towards the end, they held their nerve and got the job done. And the response from the crowd was just extraordinary. The way that fans flooded into the ground after lunch that day was very special indeed. And sure, Australia squared the ledger at Chittagong the next week in a fairly emphatic display. But taken as a whole, that was a series where I thought the relationship between Australia and Bangladesh, and of course what England had done against them in the previous year, was set to go to the next level. Stephen Smith, who was the captain of Australia at the time, spoke lovingly almost of welcoming Bangladesh to Australia in the bilateral series of 2018 that was scheduled. And almost predictably, almost shamelessly, I described Bangladesh in 17 as having been a flyover state for Australian cricket in the past, in that Bangladesh is the place you fly over to get to somewhere more important, namely India, Pakistan, or England, or other countries that Australia have shown an interest in visiting, not Pakistan in recent times, but historically, and that Bangladesh had missed out on a lot of that until 2017. They hadn't played Test cricket there since 2006, and on the other side of the ledger, it had been since 2003. Remarkably, 2003, since Australia had hosted Bangladesh for a test match, with a number of delayed, postponed, top-end series between times for any number of spurious reasons. And I got wind of the fact in India in 2017 from some senior sources at CA that they were hoping that 17 series wouldn't go ahead. They were hoping it would be downgraded to white ball cricket and they could get away with missing another test series against Bangladesh. It was only because the BCB didn't wilt in those negotiations that that series went ahead as 2 test matches as planned. And the whole thing felt like it was a disrespectful relationship. And it was almost like it were foretold that in 2018, we were briefed on background, not even an announcement going out. We were just kind of told, oh yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're not having Bangladesh here. It's the middle of footy season. There's not a lot of interest from the broadcasters to play top end test matches in the winter, as Bangladesh had done in 2003. So no, we're just not going to do it. And almost they barely even announced this was being postponed and ultimately cancelled. When you hear the word postponement from Cricket Australia, it is a proxy for cancellation. Nothing gets postponed and then moved to a later date. When something gets postponed, especially with a country like Bangladesh, it effectively gets cancelled. And so it was for what was going to be the return bout in 2018. It never happened and never will. And then in 2020, I understood why Australia didn't visit Bangladesh in 2020 for those test matches, as it fell right in the middle of COVID. But there's no chance that series will be reinstated in the way that the series against South Africa will be. So Australia didn't visit South Africa this year for COVID reasons, and they're already looking at ways they can reschedule that bilateral series in the next 12 months. No one's saying a peep about Bangladesh because it's not a priority for Australia to visit Bangladesh because they're not a wealthy nation in the same way that India are. It's not as financially lucrative going to Bangladesh in an off-Broadway series in winter in the way that it would be lucrative to go to India in a comparable time of the year. So that's the crude financial and economic rationale behind why Bangladesh has been mistreated. And I just think it's disgraceful that that nations have treated Bangladesh in this way when they were invited to join the top table in 2000. It's reminiscent of what an Australian administrator said back in 1992 when Zimbabwe were given test status for the first time, that we support Zimbabwe having test status in a theoretical sense. And it feels that Bangladesh have been treated in a similar way by Australia. And I always, therefore, enjoy when Bangladesh do well on the field against Australia, such as this year, those T20s they went out for, which I have no doubt they would have tried to have gotten out of or done a different way other than going to Bangladesh. But the incentive for going there was that it would be some preparation for this T20 World Cup they're playing in the UAE at the moment. And they take a second string team for complicated reasons, all related to the cancellation or the postponement of the IPL and COVID. I respect why players didn't want to go to Bangladesh and the West Indies, but that's the only reason that series happened this year. If there wasn't a World Cup coming up in the UAE in October, November, there is simply no way that would have gone ahead either. So it's a sorry history with Australia's treatment, administrators' treatment of Bangladesh. I don't think those views are shared by the players. I think the players have a healthy respect for Bangladesh, and hopefully that's reflected in the new administration, the new chief executive, Nick Hockley, and there'll be a new full-time chairman appointed soon with Earl Eddings having been dislodged in recent weeks. And they'll take a more respectful attitude towards Bangladesh, and we'll see more cricket between the nations starting tomorrow with their T20 clash in the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, kind of agree with basically everything you've just said there. I think, yeah, the treatment the Bangladesh receive, and I wouldn't actually just single out Australia. I mean, they have been dealt a very bad hand by Australia, no doubt, but certainly England and to a degree India as well have equally been as culpable when it comes to kind of postponing or delaying series. So actually, just very recently at the start of October, England were due to fly out to Bangladesh to play 6 white ball games just prior to the World Cup. And it was really interesting how, again, I felt that the whole, that tour ended up being postponed on really spurious sort of grounds and spurious reasons. Ostensibly, the only kind of reason that the ECB came up with was that, the England players needed a bit of a break at the end of the summer season, which is absolutely fair enough. But then we see basically half the squad going over to play the second half of the IPL, which basically that series clashed with. So yeah, it's certainly not an unusual thing for Bangladesh to be dealt a bad hand. Absolutely. And,
yeah. And look, just to jump in there, you're right. The way that England postponed that series did wreak of that. I mean, this is the scheduling logjam, isn't it? That they were going straight from their home summer, which was affected by bubbles as it was in 2020, and then bouncing into a World Cup and then going straight from there into an Ashes series. And if quarantine conditions weren't quite as strenuous, I suppose they would have gone to Bangladesh for similar reasons that Australia went there. But my point is that it's a dependent relationship. Bangladesh require nations to come there, and they only go there when it's in their interest to do so. There isn't the same degree of reciprocity that we see with other nations where even if it doesn't feel like it's necessarily convenient, they'll still make it happen. I acknowledge that Pakistan have been dealt bad cards by England and presumably Australia as well in the next couple of months, when Australia will invariably cancel their tour there the way that New Zealand and England have in recent months. But yeah, it feels to me like it's a relationship of convenience that Bangladesh will be given the time of day when it suits Australia to engage with them, and if not, they'll be treated like they'll be treated like trash. And I think that is not a sustainable position to hold if you want to see all nations given the chance to improve over time, especially all full member nations. It's not as though Bangladesh are a new member to the table. They've been there for 2 decades, or an associate nation trying to make their way through, where a one-off game here or there dramatically helps their improvement. This is a serious test-playing nation who have been successful against Australia before in Test cricket and limited overs cricket in recent times. They deserve to be treated with respect.
Absolutely. And interesting on a positive note, it's interesting what you were saying earlier about the players, that it seems that the attitude amongst the Australian players is a better one, in that they respect Bangladesh cricket, they respect Bangladesh players, and they would like to play there, given the choice, I guess. And also interesting, just to jump back a couple of years, that you were talking about Steve Smith a bit earlier. It's both Steve Smith and David Warner, the comeback tournament for them post Sandpaper Gate was in Bangladesh, where they played for the BPL.
Yes,
in the BPL.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think they only ended up. I can't remember if it was Smith or Warner who only ended up playing just a couple of games before.
Yeah,
before
Smith. He did it. Yeah, Smith hurt his elbow and required. In fact, they both hurt their elbows, but in Smith's case, he required surgery. But you're right, they did use it. I mean, and again, this is not about the players. It really isn't. I mean, yes, to be crude, it doesn't matter whether they're playing in Bangladesh or India or anywhere else, because when they're in that part of the world, they only ever go to the hotel on the ground. There's not a lot of sightseeing for the Australian team when they play in India due to just the nature of the cricket mad country in the loveliest kind of way, but they can't leave their hotel rooms without being mobbed, and that's fine. That's all part of the experience. So staying at the Radisson Blu in Dhaka or Chittagong it's no different an experience as it was to play in Ranchi or Bangalore, or where else did they play earlier in 2017? Ranchi, Bangalore, Pune, and Dharamshala. They wouldn't have been a dramatically different lived experience. So they don't mind. It's the financial implications and the fixture squeeze that nations have with their international cricket, and that was meant to be alleviated to a certain extent by the World Test Championship. But again, I don't think that's going to be too much of an imposition for the big three, because if they don't want to go, they'll just find an excuse not to go, because the big three will ultimately dictate how the World Test Championship is run. So if Australia don't wish to go to Pakistan in February next year, they'll probably do it in the UAE. But if Pakistan dig their heels in and say, look, well, it's Pakistan or nothing, well, Australia will simply say, okay, well, we're not coming, and we'll hypothecate the points the way that we did in the first cycle of the WTC, and so it goes. It'll probably be a good result for Australia not having to play Pakistan away from home, where they've had a pretty lousy record over a number of decades, really. So, yeah, they can pull the levers as they see fit to get the outcome they want.
So let's jump back then to 2017 and your time in Bangladesh and in Dhaka, and in I think you went to Chittagong as well.
Yep.
Interesting to hear this story about how you ended up at Tamim Iqbal's house for Eid. I mean, it's just incredible just to be invited to his house anyway, but on such an auspicious occasion as well.
The Dhaka Test match finished a day early, so we had one more day to soak up Chittagong. And well, actually, I think we didn't get stuck in Dhaka for one extra day. There was floods. Flash floods actually in Dhaka. And being there on that day was just an interesting experience. But then we got to Chittagong, flew down there, and it was the week of Eid. And look, I'm a vegetarian, and have strong views about the treatment of animals, but I thought that it was worthwhile just being part of the experience of watching the way that the animals are slaughtered in the street. I just thought that was something that was worth me seeing and experiencing, and done in the respectful way that it is, and that is the case in my experience. But I kind of watched that and documented that experience, and it was confronting seeing the animals bleed out on the street. How could it not be? Even if you are a meat eater, I suppose it's hard to be desensitized to seeing a cow's throat cut on the street and bleed to death. I mean, that is a full-on thing, regardless of the religious implications. It's just a visceral experience. So I'd seen all of that on the day, and the next day, Issam and I were doing a feature on Tamim and on his family in Chittagong, and doing the interview with him. I think we did the interview in his house, if I recall correctly, and we were going through all the memorabilia and all the rest of it. And his family said, "Why don't you guys stay? I mean, it's Eid dinner today." So we stuck around and had their main meal for Eid with the family. And I made an exception. As I said, I don't eat meat as a rule, but I thought, given I was there for a religious holiday, that I would eat the meal eat the meat that they had prepared carefully and dutifully for that experience. So I think that's the last time I ate any meat, was at Tamim Iqbal's house back in 2017. So yeah, a memorable experience, a lovely family, a really interesting guy, fabulous cricketer. He played really well in that series, especially at Dhaka, where he made a couple of instrumental 70s when they were collapsing early on that first day. I think they were 10 for 3. He made 75 or thereabouts and held the innings together, and much was the same in the second dig as well. So we were able to enjoy what he'd been able to do on the field, and have that experience of sharing the religious festival with him. But we did all sorts. We went around and watched where like hundreds of kids were playing like pickup cricket, as I would call it, like this kind of like in the street, and in this, it wasn't a field. It was sort of like I don't know what I'd describe it really. It was no grass on it, but it was like a dust bowl. It was probably 200 meters by 100 meters in dimensions, roughly the same size as like a gigantic cricket ground, bigger. And there were just little games breaking out everywhere. And it was amazing to watch this love of the game. And I was drawn in by it, taking lots of photos and lots of videos. The old Chittagong ground, which is near the hotel that the team was staying at, where the England side had their tour game a couple of years earlier. Yeah, quite dilapidated, but I was like drawn by the beauty of an old ground. And then, of course, the main ground where Jason Gillespie has that historical moment from 2006. So I loved being there. I loved getting the tuk-tuks to and from the ground every day, becoming friends with local tuk-tuk drivers, feeling like I kind of was part of the community, living in the community for those 8 or 9 days. Just the best experience. I loved how welcoming the Bangladesh cricket community were of me. I was doing laps of the ground, and yeah, look, it was full on. Lots of photos and lots of people wanting a piece of me as a foreign journalist. But I loved it, because as far as I was concerned, we share something in common, and that's a love of the game. And if they can have that enhanced a little bit by talking to someone visiting their country for the first time, I'm all for it. And yeah, there was a lot of interest from the Bangladeshi press pack, who I love spending time with after hours as well. It was just it was just like from start to end, the best experience. I think it's the favourite tour I've ever been on, and I can't wait to get back to Bangladesh as soon as Australia or England go back there for another test series. I'll make sure that I have enough work to justify going back as a freelancer and work on that, because and I won't be staying in any security canopy, because I know full well that Bangladesh is a very safe country in terms of being someone going over there sight unseen. I never felt under any threat. In fact, the very opposite. I felt like people were always thinking about my welfare as a visitor to their country, and I received that kind of welcome everywhere I went.
Yeah, I mean, it's just brilliant to hear the sort of passion and enthusiasm there in your voice when you're kind of describing that tour back in 2017 and all your experiences. And I think it is just a huge shame that, like you say, teams like Australia and England don't tour countries like Bangladesh enough, so that maybe England fans and Australian fans can experience exactly what you've just described there. It was interesting. I was there in 2016 when England toured for the whole of that tour, just purely as a fan. And there's basically myself and about a dozen Barmy Army on that occasion, and just speaking to each and every one of them, they absolutely loved it as well. You know, the whole tour was under strict security, a bit like the arrangements that you described in 2017 in terms of big convoys going into the games every morning, going to the grounds. But yeah, certainly the handful of fans that I spoke to absolutely loved it, and I just feel it's a bit of a shame that they don't get to experience the side of Bangladesh that you're brilliantly describing.
That's very kind. Yeah, look, and I think that you've got to see it to understand it. Like, I didn't know what I was walking into, if you know what I mean. Like, I'd read about Bangladesh, and also I was fascinated by the history too of the way Bangladesh became an independent nation, of the troubles in the early 70s, and some of the horrific treatment that members of the community received in that time. I didn't know an awful lot about that, and I found that all very gratifying that people took the time to explain that to me and further my education in that part of the world. So, as I say, it was a great experience.
Okay, well, let's wind forward then to present day. And as we all know, Bangladesh and Australia are facing one another tomorrow. Well, in terms of Bangladesh's tournament, as we were talking a bit earlier, they've really have underperformed. They haven't had a great tournament. They had two close games against Sri Lanka and the West Indies, where I felt on both occasions, really the tactics just totally were wrong when they were in those winning positions, and basically they just couldn't get themselves across the line. Against Sri Lanka, they decided to put on their part-time bowlers when really the batsmen should have been squeezed. Sri Lanka were 4 down for 70 odd, chasing 140 to win, and Bangladesh just kind of really put their foot off the gas. And then similarly, well, against West Indies in that run chase, they were kind of in it throughout, but really, if there was just a bit more intent throughout the course of that run chase, rather than looking to sort of take it to the very last over of the game and it becoming a lottery, I felt that they could have got themselves over the line on that occasion as well. I don't know if you've got any sort of general impressions about sort of how Bangladesh performed in the tournament.
Yeah, sure. I agree. I think when Rajapaksa and Asalanga came together in the game at Sharjah against Sri Lanka, that was the moment, wasn't it? 2 drop catches, regrettably, Lytton Das out there. It happens, right? That's cricket. He takes either of those catches and Bangladesh probably win the game. Even though they lost in the 19th over, that would have just changed the whole energy of the chase for Sri Lanka. And the Windies, you can look back at it now, and really it's about the way they batted in the power play, which was a problem against South Africa as well. They lost 8 for 39 in 11.2 overs from the seamers of Rabada, Nokia, and Pretorius yesterday. And a lot of that was due to the extreme pace. And look, maybe the fact that they've not been able to spend much time abroad in recent years meant that when they came up on a fairly grassy pitch at Sheikh Zayed that did have a bit of zip in it, that they just weren't equipped at the moment to play that kind of pace. And maybe you can understand that given the dust bowls they were playing at against Australia and New Zealand in the lead up to this competition. So that's not an excuse. That's just kind of like trying to find a reason why they've struggled there. But look, that'll be something Australia are mindful of. I'm certain if the Australians win the toss, they will bowl and they'll play 3 quicks, and they'll try and penetrate in the same way that was the case in the game on Tuesday. So they need to find a way to get through that interrogation. And look, not having Shakib there for the last couple of games, you can't replace Shakib Al Hassan. You can't. I mean, replacing an all-rounder. Full stop, as we know, is incredibly difficult to do. When he happens to be the most accomplished cricketer with bat and ball, that ratchets up the degree of difficulty yet further. So, this is a bit of a write-off now, this tournament, unfortunately, for Bangladesh. The fact that they, of course, lost to Scotland in the qualifying stage as well doesn't augur well. They'll go home and have to lick their wounds. But look, the beauty of cricket and the beauty of tournament play, full stop, is that it's not a particularly good sport for finish lines. This will come to an end next week, and then they'll go again and they'll look towards the next T20 World Cup in Australia. And I can only hope that they receive enough cricket in different parts of the world other than home cricket against a range of nations between now and that competition in mid-October next year, which gives them the best chance of being competitive and successful when they play in the next version of it in 11 months' time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the challenge going forward, is to really kind of become much more accustomed and adept at playing in those foreign conditions. Because yeah, as we've seen against sort of New Zealand, Australia, they can quite comfortably beat teams at home. In those conditions. But I think, as you say, the challenge is for Bangladesh in particular to play in foreign conditions and to be successful playing in those conditions. But a little bit of chicken in the egg. In order to do that, they need to be invited to play in places like Australia, England, South Africa, etc. So yeah, we await to see what happens. In terms of tomorrow, I'm kind of slightly fearful that Bangladesh might have kind of one foot on the flight back on the aeroplane to Dhaka, and it was interesting. Yeah, they looked quite flat against South Africa. You're absolutely right. I thought Rabada and Nortje bowled absolutely brilliantly to them. And, Bangladesh batters have traditionally had, a weakness against real express 90 mph quality sort of fast bowling. And that certainly was the case yesterday. So, yeah, I'm slightly fearful that tomorrow their minds might be back home rather than the game.
Yeah, look, that could happen. It's always a risk towards the back end of a tournament you're already eliminated from. On the other hand, I think this Bangladesh team, notwithstanding their recent performances, is made of fairly stern stuff, and Australia are not a strong team. I mean, that's probably a poorly articulated line, but they're not a strong team across the board. They've got strong players, but I don't think they've entirely landed on their formula. So it's a good time to get Australia in a must-win game. And as I always say when Bangladesh play Australia, they may not say publicly that their mistreatment by Cricket Australia's administrators over time is something that spurs them on, but I know that privately it does. And I know that they will be having that front of mind tomorrow. If they can if they can knock Australia out of the World Cup tomorrow, that will be plenty of an incentive for them. And one last point. Where the red with the green rather than the green on the green.
Sorry, Adam, sorry, you just broke up when you made that. Just said one last point. Do you just want to repeat that?
Okay, I'll do it again. Yep. And one last point, I want to say, I hope tomorrow, even though Australia will wear a gold uniform and a bit of green, I hope that Bangladesh clash to wear their red on green alternate strip. I think that is one of my, if not my favourite uniform in world cricket at the moment, strip, so to speak. Muhammad Assam from Cricket Info, I've mentioned a few times, a dear friend of mine, and I have been litigating a case online that Bangladesh should always wear their clash strip. There's enough teams wearing green and green. We want Bangladesh to wear the red and the green. It's striking. It looks the part. I love the design as well down the side of the shirt. So that's my other hope for tomorrow. A, that they can be giant killers, and B, they can do it in sartorial style in the red and green.
Absolutely, you got to look the part when you beat Australia for sure. And yeah, big fan of the colour red. As you can see, all my banners are red. So yeah, let's hope that they do wear that kit. So yeah, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I'm sure we could talk a lot more about Bangladesh cricket and the injustices that they face against the likes of Australia. But really great to have you on talking about your passion for Bangladesh, the country itself, as well as the cricket. It's been absolutely fantastic. Let's stay in touch and yeah, let's talk again when Bangladesh play Australia, hopefully in Australia at some point soon.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Next time we can talk about Bulbul and the 1999 World Cup and the quadrangular tournaments that Bangladesh were playing in the 80s and 90s and all of that. It's a fascinating history of the game in that country, one that's underappreciated, not known enough about, and hopefully we can all play a role in educating the cricket community about the wonderful story that is Bangladesh as they make further strides in their third decade as a full member nation. Calm the Tigers.
Brilliant, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, love to talk about 99 and the history of Bangladesh cricket. Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. This has been the Sight Screen Cricket Journal podcast. Do check out the Twitter feed there, Sight Screen CJ, and do check out the website as well, sightscreencricketjournal.com. Do subscribe as well to the YouTube channel. But until next time, I'm Tawhid Qureshi, and see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.